There's a chapter people read out loud at funerals when they don't know what else to say. You've probably heard the last lines of it. Even if you have never opened a Bible in your life, you have heard them at a graveside, in a hospital chapel, in the shaking voice of someone trying to hold a family together. Nothing can separate us. Not death, not life, nothing. But here is what almost nobody knows. The man who wrote those words had already survived every single horror he lists in them. Every one. He wasn't guessing. He wasn't writing poetry from a comfortable desk. Near the end of this letter, he sets down a list of 7 specific terrors and dares them, one by one, to pull you away from God. And every item on that list was something he had personally lived through. We will get to that list, but not yet. First, picture the room. It is somewhere around the year 57, in a rented house in the port city of Corinth. A man sits against the wall. He is not impressive to look at. Early tradition says he was short, balding, bow-legged, with eyebrows that met in the middle and a nose like a hook. His back, under his robe, is a map of scar tissue. Across from him sits another man, younger, with a reed pen and a sheet of papyrus balanced on his knee. His name is Tertius, and history would have forgotten him completely, except that he slips his own name into the last page of this letter, like a workman signing the underside of a table. I, Tertius, who wrote this letter, greet you. The scarred man starts to speak, and Tertius starts to write. What comes out of his mouth over the next few minutes is a chapter that a lot of very careful people have called the greatest thing ever written, inside the Bible or outside of it. People call it a masterpiece of theology. They call it the summit of the whole Christian faith. They call it a comfort for the dying. It is all of those things, eventually, but that is not what it is first. First, it is a letter, written by a man in scars, for people in chains, because that is who is going to read it, not scholars in a quiet library. Ordinary people in the capital city of an empire, some of them slaves, some of them poor, all of them living under an emperor whose cruelty was already becoming a legend. In just a few years, that same emperor would start covering Christians in animal skins and setting them on fire to light his garden parties. The Roman historian Tacitus wrote it down. That is the storm already gathering over the people this letter is addressed to. And into that storm, the scarred man sends 8 words that break like sunrise over the whole thing. There is therefore now no condemnation. Stay with me, because to understand why those 8 words matter, you have to hear the sentence that comes right before them. And it is not triumphant at all. It is the sound of a man drowning. Go back 1 page, because you cannot appreciate a sunrise if you have not sat in the dark. The chapter right before this one ends with one of the most naked confessions any human being has ever put into writing. And it comes from a man you would not expect to hear it from. This is Paul, former Pharisee, trained under the finest teacher in Jerusalem. A man who, before he met Jesus, could stand in a crowd and honestly believe he was the most righteous person in it. And here is what that man writes. I do not understand my own actions, for I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. Read that again slowly, because if you have ever made a promise to yourself at midnight and broken it by noon, you already know exactly what he is talking about. The diet you meant to keep, the temper you swore you'd control, the habit you have quit 100 times and picked back up 101. The version of yourself you keep meaning to become and somehow never quite do. Paul is not describing a bad week. He is describing the human condition, and then he stops pretending to be strong. He just breaks. Wretched man that I am. Who will deliver me from this body of death? That word, wretched, in the original Greek is the sound of someone at the absolute end of themselves. It is the cry of a man who has finally admitted that he cannot fix himself, no matter how hard he tries, no matter how much he knows, no matter how sincerely he means it. He is drowning, and he knows it. Hold on to that image. A man, underwater, out of air, out of options. And then, no transition, no warm-up, no gentle easing in. The very next line of the letter is this. There is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. Do you feel what just happened? He went from drowning to breathing in a single sentence. From who will rescue me to there is now no condemnation, with nothing in between. That word now is doing an enormous amount of work. Not someday. Not when you clean yourself up. Not after you finally break the habit. Now, in the wreckage. In the middle of the failure you were confessing 4 words ago. Now, here's the part nobody tells you about. That word condemnation. It is a courtroom word. It is the sound of a gavel coming down. And Paul is telling a room full of people who felt like failures, people who knew their own record, who could recite every promise they'd broken, that the verdict has already been read. And the verdict is not guilty, not try harder, not maybe, not guilty. Case closed. The gavel already fell, and it fell on the other side. Now, watch what he does with that freedom, because this is where it gets remarkable. Paul takes people who have spent their whole lives afraid of God, afraid of getting it wrong, afraid of the rules, afraid of the punishment, and he tells them the relationship has completely changed. You did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, he says, but you received the spirit of adoption as sons, by whom we cry, Abba, Father. That word, Abba, it is not Greek. Paul, writing in Greek, suddenly reaches back into his own childhood language, Aramaic, and drops in a word so intimate that for centuries translators were almost embarrassed by it. Because Abba is not the formal, distant word for father. It is the warm one, the one a child uses at home. It is Papa. It is the word you cry in the dark when you wake up scared and want the one person in the world who makes you feel safe. Think about the distance Paul just traveled. He started as a man drowning in his own failure, crying, "Wretched man that I am." And a few sentences later he is a child, reaching up in the dark, calling God Papa. That is not a small step. That is the entire message of the chapter, compressed into one word from home. And here is something that will stay with you. The people who first heard this word read aloud in Rome, many of them were slaves. In that world, a slave had no father in any legal sense. A slave could be sold, separated from their children, owned. And into that room, this letter says, you are not a slave. You are adopted. You have a father. You can climb up into his lap and call him Papa. Imagine being a person who legally belonged to someone else and hearing that the God of the entire universe had signed adoption papers with your name on them. But none of us would ever have heard any of this, not one word of it, if 2 ordinary people had not done 2 very ordinary things. The first was the man we already met, Tertius, the one holding the pen. We don't know anything else about him. We don't know his face, his age, how he came to be in that room. All we have is one sentence, where he steps out from behind the writing and says, quietly, I, Tertius, greet you. And then he steps back. He is, in a sense, the patron saint of everyone who has ever done the unglamorous work while somebody else got the credit. He wrote the greatest chapter in the Bible with his own hand, and almost nobody remembers his name. The second person was a woman named Phoebe. At the very end of this letter, Paul mentions her, a deacon from a little harbor town called Cenchreae, just outside Corinth. And most people read right past her. But scholars widely believe that Phoebe was the one who carried this scroll. She was the courier. She got on a ship with this rolled-up sheet of papyrus tucked away and guarded, and she sailed across open water, a dangerous thing to do, all the way to Rome. Which means that Phoebe may well have been among the first people ever to read Romans chapter 8 aloud to the church it was written for. Sit with that for a second. One of the first voices ever to speak, "There is now no condemnation," to a frightened room full of slaves and outcasts, was a woman's voice. A woman who risked a sea voyage to deliver a letter she probably didn't fully understand yet, to people she had never met, because it mattered that much. The chapter almost didn't reach us. It traveled by the hand of a forgotten scribe and the feet of a faithful woman across a hostile sea. And it did reach us. It reached all the way to you, right now, hearing these words. Which means it is time to ask the question this whole letter is building toward. If there is no condemnation, if God is Papa, then why does it still hurt so much? Before we go there, and we are about to go somewhere hard, let me say one quick thing. If this is landing on you right now, if any part of this is loosening something in your chest, do me a small favor and subscribe. Not for me, for the next person who ends up here at 3 in the morning looking for exactly this, so that when they need it, it finds them. And leave a comment. While you're thinking about it, I read them, and I want to know, has anyone ever read Romans 8 to you when you had no words of your own left? Because that is exactly where we are headed next. We have heard the verdict, no condemnation. We have heard the name, Abba, Papa. And every line of this chapter so far has been written for one specific person in real pain. A slave who owned nothing. A failure who couldn't fix himself. A frightened church under a cruel emperor. But Paul is not done being honest with you. He is not going to pretend the pain stops just because the verdict changed. In fact, the next thing he does is the last thing you would expect from a chapter this famous. He starts to groan. Here is something they don't tell you in the coffee mug version of this chapter. The version cross-stitched onto pillows. The version that only ever quotes the pretty lines. Right in the middle of the greatest chapter ever written about hope, Paul stops. And 3 times in a row, he uses the same strange word. In Greek, it is stenazo, and it means to groan. Not to speak, not to pray politely with your hands folded. To groan, the low, wordless sound a person makes when the pain has gone past language. The sound from a hospital bed, the sound from behind a closed bathroom door, when someone thinks no one can hear. You know this sound. You have made this sound. And Paul says it is coming from 3 places at once. First, he says, creation itself is groaning. The whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. Look at the world, Paul says. Really look at it. The earthquakes, the disease, the animal that starves, the forest that burns, the child born already sick. Something is wrong with the world, and every honest person feels it in their bones. Paul does not deny that. He does not tell you to smile through it. He says the entire planet is groaning like a woman in labor. And notice, that is the one word that changes everything. Labor. Because a woman groaning in childbirth is in real agony. Nobody pretends otherwise. But it is not the groan of death. It is the groan of something being born. The pain has a direction. It is going somewhere. Hold that thought, because Paul is about to build his entire answer to suffering on it. Second groan. We ourselves groan inwardly. Us. You and me. Paul does not exempt believers from the ache. He does not say faith makes you stop hurting. He says we groan too, waiting for the day every wrong thing is finally made right. So if you are a person of faith, and you still cry in the car, still lie awake, still feel the weight, Paul is not disappointed in you. He is describing you. He put your groan in the Bible on purpose. But it is the third groan that will undo you. Because Paul says that when you have run completely out of words, when you don't even know what to pray anymore, when all you can do is sit there and ache, the Spirit of God Himself begins to groan. The Spirit intercedes for us, with groanings too deep for words. Read that slowly. God does not stand at a distance and wait for you to compose a proper prayer. When you are past words, God comes down into the wordlessness with you and groans on your behalf. That sound you make at your lowest, the one you are ashamed of, the one that isn't even a sentence, just a raw exhale of pain. Paul says that sound is already a prayer. It is already being carried up. You do not have to translate your agony into something respectable first. The groan itself is heard. Same word, 3 times. The world groans. You groan. And God groans right alongside you. He did not spare Himself the sound. Now, somewhere in this same chapter sits the most misused sentence in the whole Bible. You have heard it. Someone probably said it to you at the worst possible moment, at a funeral, or a hospital bedside, and it landed like a slap instead of a comfort. All things work together for good. People throw that line like a bandage over an open wound. They mean well. But listen to how they use it, as if Paul is saying the cancer was good, the crash was good, the loss of the child was good, and you just need to see the bright side. That is not what he wrote. That is not even close. Look at the actual words. All things work together for good. Not, all things are good. Not, every terrible thing is secretly wonderful. He says all things work together, that God is able to take even the wreckage, even the parts that are genuinely evil and should never have happened, and move them towards something good that you cannot see yet. The cancer is not good, but God can bring good even out of the cancer. Those are two completely different claims. One is a lie that insults your pain. The other is a hope you can actually stand on. And here is what that line actually means. Read the very next sentence, and it becomes clear Paul is not talking about your circumstances getting nicer at all. He is talking about you being made into something. The good he promises is not a better situation. It is a transformed soul. God is not promising to fix your Tuesday. He is promising that not 1 ounce of your suffering will be wasted in what he is making of you. Now hold all of that in your mind, the groaning, the labor, the God who does not waste pain, and remember who first heard it. A frightened church in Rome, and the sky over them was darkening. The Roman historian Tacitus, writing a generation later, recorded what was coming for those Christians. An emperor named Nero, looking for someone to blame for a fire that had gutted the city, turned on them. Tacitus describes it plainly, and it is hard to read even now. Christians wrapped in the skins of animals and torn apart by dogs, others nailed up, others set on fire, after dark to serve, as lamps in the emperor's garden. That is the audience. Those are the people about to hear the final movement of this letter. Not comfortable people. Not safe people. People who could feel the storm coming and had every reason to believe God had forgotten them completely. And it is to those people, the ones for whom the words were most likely to sound like a cruel joke, that Paul writes the most defiant paragraph in the history of human language. Stay with me, because now we finally reach the list. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? That is how Paul opens it. A question thrown at the whole universe like a challenge. And then he does something almost reckless. He doesn't keep it vague. He doesn't say hard times or bad days. He names them. 7 specific horrors, lined up one after another, and he dares every single one of them to come and try. Shall tribulation, or distress, or persecution, or famine, or nakedness, or peril, or sword? Now, remember the promise from the very beginning of all this. I told you the man writing this list was not guessing, that he had already survived every item on it. This is the moment I meant. So let me show you, one word at a time, exactly what those 7 words cost the man who wrote them. Tribulation. In another letter, Paul makes a list of his own life, and it reads like a war report. He was beaten with rods 3 separate times. Not metaphorically, Roman rods, on bare skin, until the crowd got tired. Distress. He says he was near death again and again. Sleepless nights. A body pushed past what a body is built to take. The kind of pressure that leaves no room left in it to breathe. Persecution. 5 separate times, his own people gave him 39 lashes. The beating stopped 1 short of 40, because 40 could kill a man. And then city after city, he was hunted and driven out by the very religious world he had once belonged to. Famine. He writes, plainly, that he knew hunger and thirst, that he had gone without food, that he had been cold. This is not a preacher imagining what suffering might feel like. He had felt his own body wasting. Nakedness. That word in his list is not poetry either. He says it flatly. He had been left without clothing, exposed, shamed, with nothing. Peril. He writes that danger followed him everywhere. Danger from rivers, danger from bandits, danger at sea, danger from men who smiled at him and meant to kill him. 3 times the ship went down under him. Once he spent a full day and a full night adrift in the open water, in the dark, waiting to find out if he would live until morning. And then the last word, sword. Paul writes the word sword. And here is the thing that turns your blood cold when you know his story. Years before he ever dictated this chapter, before he was Paul the Apostle, he was Saul, a young man standing in a crowd, guarding the coats of the men who were picking up stones. And the person they were stoning to death was a young believer named Stephen. The book of Acts says that as the stones came down, Stephen's face was like the face of an angel, and that he died praying for the very people killing him. And Saul stood there, watching, approving. So when Paul writes the word sword, when he lists violent death as one of the enemies that cannot separate you from God, he is not writing as a spectator. He had held the coats. He had watched a righteous man die. He knew exactly what the sword does from both sides of it. And he still says, not even this, not even the sword. Do you understand what he is doing? He is not a comfortable man writing comfortable words to comfortable people. He is a man covered in scars, holding a list of his own wounds up to the light, and telling a frightened church that he tested every one of these things personally, and not one of them could do it. Not one of them could break the grip of God on his life. And then he reaches for a word, so rare it barely appears anywhere else, because no ordinary word is big enough. He wants to say we conquer these things. But conquering is not enough for what he means. So he takes the Greek word for conqueror and crushes a prefix onto the front of it. Hypernicomen. We are more than conquerors, not survivors, not people who barely limp across the finish line. Hyperconquerors. People who come through the very worst the world can do and come out the other side holding more than they went in with. And then the finish, the lines they read at the funerals, the lines you have heard even if you have never opened a Bible. For I am sure that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. He runs out of categories on purpose. Death, covered. Life, covered. The future, the powers, the heights, the depths. And then, in case he missed anything, he throws a net over the entire universe, nor anything else in all creation. There is no loophole. There is no fine print. There is nothing that exists, nothing that could ever exist, that has the power to pull you out of the hand that is holding you. Now let me bring this all the way home, to a room you may know too well. It is the middle of the night. It might be a hospital corridor with that particular fluorescent light that makes everything look colder than it is. It might be your own kitchen at 3 a.m, holding a phone that just delivered news you cannot undo. It might be a folding chair at a funeral where someone stands up front and begins to read, "Nothing shall separate us," and you feel something in your chest hold, even though you could not tell anyone why. Here's why it holds. Remember the groan, the wordless sound you make when you are past praying. Paul already told you what that sound is. It is not weakness, and it is not the absence of God. It is the Spirit of God groaning inside you, carrying up the prayer you cannot form. So in that corridor, in that kitchen, in that folding chair, when you have no words left and all you can do is make that low, broken sound, you are not alone in it. You are not even really the only one making it. God is in the groan with you. And the whole point of the chapter is that the God who is in the groan with you is a God that nothing in all creation can pull away. Not the diagnosis, not the empty chair, not the sword, not one single item on the list. He lived them all, and none of them won. So before you go, let me tell you what to carry out of this room. When the shame comes back, and it will, some morning you will wake up with the whole weight of who you've been sitting on your chest. Remember that no condemnation was never a feeling you have to work up. It is a verdict that has already been read. The gavel already fell. Your worst days do not get to reopen a case that is already closed. You don't have to win the argument with yourself. You just have to remember it is settled. And when you reach the end of yourself, when there are no words left, and all that comes out is that low, broken sound you are ashamed of, stop being ashamed of it. That sound is already a prayer. You do not have to make your pain respectable before you bring it to God. The groan itself is being carried up in the arms of a spirit who groans right along with you. You were never making that sound alone. But here is the thing I most want you to hold on to tonight. The man who wrote that nothing can separate you from the love of God did not write it as a theory. He had been beaten until his back was open. He had gone hungry and cold and been left with nothing. He had gone down with 3 ships and floated a night in black water not knowing if he would see the sun. He had watched a good man die under a hail of stones and lived the rest of his life knowing he had stood there and approved. He held the entire worst-case list of human suffering up to the light, checked off every item by name from his own scars, and said, "Not one of them could pull me out of the hand of God." And if it could not separate him The man who lived the whole list. Then it cannot separate you. Not the diagnosis on the paper. Not the name you cannot stop grieving. Not the failure you are certain disqualifies you. Not the 3 a.m. you might be sitting in right now. Nothing on your list is bigger than the ones already on his. And none of his won. That is what Romans 8 really is. It was never a chapter about theology. It was a scarred man's letter to frightened people, telling them the one thing that turns out to be true all the way to the bottom. You are held. And nothing in all creation, nothing that exists, nothing that ever could, is strong enough to make God let go. So let me ask you before you leave, which line of Romans 8 has ever held you up when nothing else could? The verdict, the groan, the Abba, the list, the promise at the end. Tell me in the comments, and tell me who it was for. The funeral, the phone call, the long night it got you through. Because someone is going to scroll down and read what you wrote at 3 a.m. when they have nothing left of their own. Your handful of words might be the hand they reach for. He lived the whole list. Not one item on it won. Neither will yours.